Okay, what is thrombosis? Thrombosis actually is a pathological condition in which there is undue and unwanted formation of clot inside the lumen of the blood vessels, that is without any vascular injury. Without any need, there is the formation of clot inside the lumen of the blood vessels in the flowing blood. Okay, so that will obviously obstruct the normal flow of the blood and that can lead to many pathological conditions. So what are the reasons of the thrombosis? Now, how can it arise? What are the reasons of the thrombosis? So most important reasons of the thrombosis for the first time were explained by Virchow, Rudolf Virchow, in his concept known as Virchow's triad. That is, he said that there are three most important reasons of the thrombosis. The first one is any kind of endothelial injury, which can either be physical or it can be at the level of the gene. Okay, we'll study it later how. Next is altered blood flow. That is, the normal blood flow actually is laminar, which is explained by Bernoulli's theorem. But if that laminar blood flow is disrupted or it is altered, it can lead to the arise of the thrombus formation. Or the third condition is the hypercoagulability of the blood. That is, some kind of exaggerated tendency of the blood to clot is what is known as hypercoagulability of the blood. Let us study each of these causes of the thrombosis one by one in detail. Okay, endothelial injury. What do you understand by endothelial injury? Like, definitely there can be a severe form of endothelial injury which is physical. That is disruption of endothelial lining, which can lead to the exposure of subendothelial matrix and thus exposure of von Willebrand factor, which can lead to the initiation of the hemostatic mechanism and thus thrombus formation. But this endothelial injury can also be due to some other mechanisms, like if the person gets exposed to some noxious stimuli. Now what those noxious stimuli can be, like some inflammatory mediators or some infectious agents, or like even the altered blood flow, or like toxins present in the cigarette smoke, or like some of the metabolic disorders, like which are obviously inherited, like hypercholesterolemia or homocystinemia. These noxious stimuli can change the genetic expression of the endothelium such that the endothelium will start becoming prothrombotic. We know that normal healthy intact endothelium is antithrombotic. That is, it expresses some antithrombotic factors which prevent the undue clotting in the lumen of the blood vessels. Okay, but in the presence, or in response to these noxious stimuli, the endothelium can become prothrombotic at the genetic level. That is known as endothelial cell activation or dysfunction. Okay, so the endothelium becomes procoagulant, prothrombotic, and antifibrinolytic. That is, it down regulates the expression of thrombomodulin, which otherwise is an anticoagulator. Okay, what was thrombomodulin doing? Actually, it was modulating the function of thrombin from being a procoagulant to an anticoagulant. Okay, thrombin was actually synthesizing protein C, and protein C was cleaving the activated factor 5th and activated factor 8th. But this prothrombotic endothelium actually downregulates the expression of thrombomodulin after dysfunctional after getting activated by these noxious stimuli, or it can increase the activity of thrombin as a procoagulant, or it can decrease the exposure or the expression of the protein C, which is an anticoagulant. Okay, or it can become antifibrinolytic. That is, it can start synthesizing some tissue plasminogen activator inhibitors. What was tissue plasminogen activator was doing? In the case of healthy conditions, in the cases of normal physiological conditions on intact endothelium, tissue plasminogen activator was getting expressed, which was responsible for the conversion of tissue plasminogen coming from the liver to tissue plasmin, and tissue plasmin was behaving like a fibrinolysin, which was cleaving the fibrin strands to fibrin degradation products. Okay, but by synthesizing tissue plasminogen activator inhibitors, this dysfunctional endothelium actually becomes antifibrinolytic and prothrombotic. Okay, now this endothelial injury mostly underlies the undue clotting formation or undue thrombosis in the heart or in the arterial circulation, where the shear stress is very high. Now, what is meant by this condition of high shear stress? Actually, shear stress is, explained by, what does it mean? shear stress actually is the magnitude of force per unit area on the vessel wall, which is really very high when it comes to the arteries, because they are narrower as compared to the veins, and also the blood pressure in the arteries is higher as compared to veins. So the shear stress is naturally higher in case of arteries than in veins. So because of high shear stress, endothelial injury, there are much chances of endothelial injury to take place because of turbulency in in heart or in the arterial circulation. That can lead to endothelial injury, or finally the thrombosis. Now the next condition is altered blood flow. Altered blood flow. How can altered blood flow result in this pathological condition of thrombosis? Let us look. Now we know that the normal blood flow is laminar, which is explained by Bernoulli's theorem. What does it mean when I say that the normal blood flow is laminar? If I draw a blood vessel, okay, now just suppose this is a blood vessel, the normal blood flow is laminar. That is, the blood flow is very streamlined. It is not turbulent. It is not static blood flow. That's very streamlined. That is, the formed elements flow in the center, and they are separated by this endothelial lining by a thin layer of the plasma. That is what is known as the normal laminar blood flow. Okay, this is explained by Bernoulli's theorem. When this laminar blood flow get disrupted, that is, when the blood flow either becomes turbulent or becomes static, that can lead indirectly to this pathological condition of thrombus formation. Now how? Now suppose the blood flow gets turbulent, okay? Now this turbulency, obviously that turbulency, that hyper blood flow can lead to endothelial injury, or we've already seen here that this altered blood flow, this condition of altered blood flow can lead to endothelial cell activation. That is, it can lead to the dysfunction of endothelium at the genetic level. It can make the healthy intact endothelium from antithrombotic to prothrombotic. So okay, so this turbulency can lead to endothelial injury, physical endothelial injury, or it can lead to endothelial cell activation, or obviously this turbulency can lead to a condition of increased shear stress, even if it happens in the venous lumen or in the lumen of the veins, okay? Or indirectly, this turbulency can form the local pockets of stresses, because turbulency has no fixed direction of the blood flow, okay? The blood can even flow in the opposite direction, hence resisting the normal laminar streamlined blood flow, and hence forming the local pockets of stresses. And these local pockets indirectly would result in the formation of thrombosis. Okay, so this is how turbulency can lead to the formation of thrombus, the pathological condition of thrombosis. Now this turbulency can happen in some clinical settings, like in case of like atherosclerotic plaques. We know that whenever atherosclerotic develops in arterial circulation or in the arterial lumen, what happens that there is the condition of stenosis or narrowing of that arterial lumen, okay? That narrowing of arterial lumen increases the shear stress or the shear force on the vessel wall, and the things can get even worsened when this atherosclerotic plaque get ulcerated. When this atherosclerotic plaque get ulcerated, it results in the exposure of the subendothelial matrix and von Willebrand factor, which can otherwise lead to the activation of platelets and adherence of platelets, and finally thrombosis. Okay, so how can stasis lead to the disruption of laminar blood flow, and finally the pathological condition of thrombosis? Okay, stasis disrupts the laminar blood flow definitely, because when there will be a condition of the stasis or the slowed blood flow, the formed elements of the blood, be it the platelets or the red blood cells or the leukocyte, will start coming in contact with the endothelium. They'll start slowing down and will start falling down. They'll start coming in contact with endothelium. They'll start activating, they'll start getting adhered to it, and will start forming the thrombus. Okay, this is how stasis can lead to the formation of thrombus, the pathological condition of thrombosis. Now, what are the different clinical settings in which we can see the thrombosis or the pathological condition of thrombus formation due to altered blood flow? Like as I've already said that in the pathological condition of the atherosclerosis, the atherosclerotic plaque, or the ulcerated atherosclerotic plaque, what happens that it leads to the turbulent blood flow, which leads to thrombus formation. And in patients who suffer from recurring deep vein thrombosis, actually we know that in the veins the blood has to flow against gravity. That creates a situation of stasis over there, and that can lead to the thrombosis due to stasis in like deep in the condition of deep venous thrombosis, or like aortic aneurysms. What happens in aortic aneurysms? When the aorta gets dilated, the shear stress gets reduced in the aorta, and this leads to the condition of stasis forming thrombosis. In case of myocardial infarction, the part of the heart that undergoes necrosis, that loses its contractility, that becomes dilated, and that dilation leads to a condition of stasis, and that can lead to thrombus formation inside the heart. In the condition of pneumatic mitral valve stenosis, the left atrium gets dilated. That can lead to aneurysm over there and can lead to thrombus formation in the left atrium. Hyperviscosity, the condition of hyperviscosity, like in case of pathological increased red blood cell count, that is polycythemia vera, the hindrance to the blood flow can lead to the stasis or turbulency, the altered blood flow, that can disrupt the laminar blood flow, and finally thrombus formation. Sickle cell anemia can also impede the blood flow because the red blood cells are abnormally shaped, so that can lead to that can impede to the blood flow, that can lead to stasis, and finally disruption of the laminar blood flow, and thus thrombotic form. Let's come on to the third factor which can lead to thrombosis according to Virchow's triad, that is hypercoagulability. Now, what is hypercoagulability? Hypercoagulability is the exaggerated tendency of the blood to clot. Now, first thing that I want to clear over here is that clotting actually is the property of plasma and not the blood, because clotting does not involve the formation of platelet plaque. Clotting actually is simply the formation of the coagulum of the fibrin strands. That simply involves that coagulation cascade of the enzymatic reactions, that is activation of clotting factors one after the other. That is what is known as clotting. Hypercoagulability actually becomes the exaggerated tendency of the plasma to clot because of either some inherited reasons or the primary reasons, or the secondary reasons which are the acquired reasons. Now, what can be the primary reasons which can lead to some alteration in one of the 13 or the 12 clotting factors we know that can lead to the hypercoagulability of the blood? Like factor fifth leadin. Factor fifth leadin is the name of the mutated gene which actually is responsible for the synthesis of factor fifth clotting factor. Okay, when this factor fifth gets mutated, what happens that it becomes resistant to the cleavage by protein C. We know that the protein C, which is synthesized by the antithrombotic thrombin when it has been modulated by thrombomodulin, it actually, that protein C cleaves two factors, activated factor fifth and activated factor eighth. In this condition of factor fifth lead-in, this factor fifth gene becomes mutated and becomes resistant to cleavage by that protein C. Okay, this is factor fifth lead-in. This is how the blood can become hypercoagulable in this inherited or the primary condition. Or there can be a prothrombin gene mutation in which the prothrombin levels in the blood or in the plasma can get elevated, or there can be these are actually the more common reasons of why the blood becomes hypercoagulable when we talk of just the primary reasons of the hypercoagulability of the blood. Some rare primary reasons or inherited reasons of the hypercoagulability of the blood can be like the deficiency of some anticoagulants, like deficiency of thrombomodulin or deficiency of protein C or S or antithrombin third. Okay, now what are the secondary reasons, or what are the risk factors, acquired risk factors that can lead to the hypercoagulability of the blood? Now definitely, like if a person is bedridden, or if a person is on prolonged bed rest, or if a person travels too much in airplane, that can lead to the condition of stasis in his blood vessels, and that can lead to the hypercoagulability of the blood. That that person becomes on a greater risk that his blood will start getting coagulating. Okay, that makes that person's blood hypercoagulable. Okay, or a condition, or a person who has suffered from myocardial infarction, this condition actually will impede the blood flow. Okay, the normal blood flow rate will get impeded, the blood flow will get slowed down this will lead to the risk factor of stasis and finally thrombosis. Any kind of tissue injury like surgery, fracture, burn, it can definitely lead to the platelet aggregation and thrombosis. Disseminated cancers, actually there are some cancers which lead to the production of procoagulants. Okay, so this can lead to this hypercoagulability condition because of some acquired risk factors. Hyperestrogenic states like pregnancy or lactation, that is postpartum period, when the estrogen levels of the blood, when the estrogen titer of the blood in the blood of the lady are too high. Actually, what does it do? That estrogen, if it is present in excessive amounts in the blood, it leads to the reduction of the synthesis of anticoagulants from the liver and stimulation of the synthesis of procoagulants from the liver. So it can lead to thrombosis or the hypercoagulability of the blood. And the two most important disorders which should need special mention are like heparin induced thrombocytopenia syndrome, which is actually an acquired disorder, and how this can lead to hypercoagulability of the blood. And the next one is antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, and how this can lead to the hypercoagulability of the blood. We'll study it in the next coming videos.